I do have another question though for you, and it's a totally different type. And it is Will from Vancouver, and he asks, how do you plan on combating systemic racism in the RCMP against Black and Indigenous peoples and in response to the Black Lives Matter movement? Please highlight something beyond tackling unconscious bias through workshops.
Yeah, and Hedy, it's the most important question of our time. And I think the greatest responsibility, I come from a diverse city. And I live in a diverse country, and I think the most important thing that defines us as Canadians is our pluralism, the way we embrace our diversity, and it is truly the strength of this country. But it still needs work, and I will be the first to acknowledge. I remember the very first day in 2005, I got named police chief, and the very first question that was put to me, as they were announcing that I was going to be the new chief. A reporter in Toronto asked me, is there such a thing as racial profiling in the police? And I said, well, yes, of course. We recruit from human race. And racism is a terrible human frailty. And if you don't acknowledge its existence, how can you do anything about it? And that was national news at the time because I was the first police leader actually to make that statement. But it was so self-evident, so obvious. And so I think there's a tremendous number of things you can do. And by the way, I don't discount the importance of fair and impartial training. I think that the science of bias, helping police officers be more self-aware of the influence that bias can have on them is important. But I understand completely the question that that's not all we're going to do. I believe that a police service, in order to be culturally competent, has to have a diversity of perspectives. And I will tell you in my organization, again, when I became the police chief, I actually made a rule that half of all the people that we hired had to be from visible minority communities and or women. And it was because that diversity of perspective that women and visible minorities bring to policing make it smarter and more effective. And it's not just the diversity of gender and race. It's a diversity of perspectives, people who know what it's like to live with discrimination, harassment, disparity, injustice, who know what it's like to be a new immigrant and who have struggled to be treated fairly and to have justice from the justice system. That's what we want in policing. And it's not just a hiring strategy, but you also have to develop that diversity throughout your organization so that your leadership team, and when I left my police service 10 years later, half of my command team and 2/3 of my deputies were visible minority officers. And frankly, we were a smarter command table because they brought all of that lived experience to policing, which is really important. I think as well, it's important. I think everybody's always looking for a villain. And don't get me wrong, because they're human beings, there are people that will engage in misconduct and do racist and inappropriate things. And we have to have strong systems of oversight and accountability to weed those people out. But even that's not the whole answer. And I think it's really important that we're now talking about systemic, structural racism. And it's because when you actually step back from the entire criminal justice system and so many other aspects of our society and look at the disparate outcomes, the disproportionate impact, there is disparity in criminal justice, but in housing, in health, in education, and in employment, and in every other aspect of our society. And that's not just the result of bad actors. It's a result of fault in structural and systemic faults in our systems. And so I think it's really important for the police, for the RCMP, to look at how decisions are made and how our criminal justice system works that results in an over-incarceration of young Black men, indigenous people in our prison system. To look at, why, sentencing are different and to look at how our courts work, how the police work, how prosecutions work, how corrections work. Even something as I think as straightforward as the pardons, the impact of criminal records on visible minority communities is much more significant than it is on everyone else. And so you can reform that system to make pardons of records far more accessible, less cost, because those are structural impediments that are holding people back and creating disparate outcomes. And so on the one hand, I understand in policing, good systems of governance, oversight, and accountability are absolutely critical. But I think the responsibility of people like you and I, Hedy, is to look at our systems, our criminal justice system in particular, and to look at those systemic and structural problems within those systems, that if we change, we can make a difference. And I'll give you one example. Marijuana laws, the criminalization of marijuana was resulting in an over-criminalization of young black men and indigenous men in this country. Like the numbers were really stark, 8 times more likely to be convicted of an offense related to the possession of marijuana. All of the police officers that laid those charges, all the prosecutors that prosecuted them, all the judges that registered those convictions weren't racist for doing that. The system was systemically set that up. And so when we changed the way we regulate cannabis, we removed that systemic discrimination. And we made life better for those Canadians who were being discriminated against. That's a systemic change. That's the type of thing as a government, like certainly we'll hold individuals to account, but there's more work to do. And that's, I think that's the lens we have to bring to everything we do.
I think the issue, Bill, is that these systems and institutions were built, decades ago by people who were white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant, came automatically with a built-in bias. And so now kind of getting more and more people to get into that system and to reach the top in that system is going to be able to change that thinking. And I think just to say that is also not going to happen overnight.
No, ma'am, but I will tell you, people like me, it's important that we recognize, first of all, our privilege. And it's also important to listen to the lived experience of people who have not enjoyed the same privilege. And I think that has to inform what we do as we do.